Letting go is not an act, it is the complete cessation of the self. You cannot surrender if there is still a someone who wants to do it. In the stream of beliefs and religions, the concept of surrendering to God is often conjured up as a small human being bowing down before the Supreme Being, begging for forgiveness, guidance, and salvation. People pray, chant, make offerings, and sing hymns as an expression of submission. These acts are seen as individual efforts to attain a higher spiritual state with the divine. But for Ramana Maharshi, surrender was not simply a religious act or a formal ritual. It was not a spiritual technique to be accepted or blessed. For Ramana, surrender was not something you did, it was the complete cessation of the person who was trying to do it. When effort disappears, ego disappears. It may sound paradoxical, but this is the heart of Ramana Maharshi's teaching. He emphasized that surrendering does not happen when you make more effort, it happens when you disappear. Consider for a moment, how can you genuinely surrender when you still have an image of yourself as the one who is doing the surrendering? I am the one who is trying to give. I am the one who is letting go of the ego. I am the one who is choosing to believe in God. All of these statements, no matter how noble they may seem, are subtle expressions of the ego operating on its own. They are simply disguised versions of the ego, dressed up in religious or spiritual clothing to maintain its own existence. We deceive ourselves into thinking that we are letting go, when in fact, the ego is still cleverly holding the reins. Ramana didn't say you should surrender, he said surrendering doesn't exist. In a simple yet insightful moment, Ramana Maharshi illuminated the nature of surrender. True surrender is letting go of the idea that there is a separate individual living this life. When there is no I to surrender to, there is only God. Surrender is a state of egolessness, where there is no doer, no clinger, no one to hold on to anything, including the concept of surrender. Surrender there is no one before God, there is only God. As long as you hold on to the image of yourself as a God-seeking person, there is still separation. There are still two entities, a small you who is asking, and a distant he who is blessing. That is not surrender, it is a transaction, a spiritual transaction that seems noble, but is still based on the foundation of separation. Ramana did not accept that separation. He did not let us console ourselves with half-baked illusions. He exposed the uncompromising truth. There is no I and God. There is only one. When the seeker disappears, what remains is himself. This is a self-evident truth. When the illusion of a separate self disappears, there remains only the absolute existence, which we call God, or the self. Ramana didn't tell you to believe, he taught you to disappear. Faith is often glorified as a beacon. We are taught to believe in the existence of a divine being, in sublime teachings, in a savior, in an eternal paradise, in the law of cause and effect, and in the path to liberation. Faith, however sincere, originates in the mind, a machine that endlessly creates concepts, makes divisions, and nurtures a subtle, imperceptible ego. Ramana Maharshi, with his penetrating insight, went straight to the heart of the matter, removing all the fog of illusion. You don't need to believe in God. You just disappear. When the ego disappears, God is the only thing left. When faith remains I and God, still separate. When you say I believe in God, you are inadvertently establishing a separation. You are implicitly saying, I, a separate entity, am placing my faith in a higher being. That is, there is still a subject and an object. This is, in fact, a subtle way of the ego being upgraded by religion. You think you are being humble, but you are holding on to the image of a good self who has faith. Ramana does not tolerate this image. He shatters it, without regret. God is not outside for you to place your faith in. God is the ground of your very knowing that you exist. This is a powerful statement, taking us beyond the notion of a separate God, residing somewhere in the distant heavens. God is not an object to be sought or believed in, but the very essence of existence, the ground of all perception, of your very knowing of your existence. He is the absolute reality. You don't need to imagine God, because you are immersed in Him. In his profound conversations with seekers, Ramana was often confronted with the question, if God is real, why don't I feel Him? His answer, simple yet full of wisdom, exposed the seeker's illusion. Because you are searching with the eyes of the ego. Whereas you yourself, as an entity, have never existed. You are the dream. He is that which is dreaming. You cannot see God from the position of a searching ego, because the ego itself is an illusion. When the seeker dissolves, when the veil of the ego is lifted, God appears without any medium, formless, nameless, undefined, yet more clearly than anything you have ever seen, ever felt. It is pure presence, unobscured by the limitations of the mind. No more believer, only self-belief. Ramana did not reject belief. He merely pointed out that true belief does not require a bearer. It has no object, no subject, no purpose. It is not oriented to anything. It is a state of being. It is a total dissolution into reality, where there is no longer any distinction between the believer and the thing believed. When you are no more, when the false self is dissolved, then you do not need to believe in anything anymore. Because you and God are already one, before the thought of God even comes into your mind. It is not understanding, it is disintegration. We often mistakenly think that the more we learn, the more knowledge we accumulate, the closer we get to the truth. But in fact, the more you pile up layers of I know, the more barriers you create between yourself and the mysterious not knowing where truth resides. Ramana, with calmness and wisdom, looked gently at the student who was diligently writing, and said only one sentence. You need not write down the words of the Master. Let the words of the Master destroy the one who is writing. This saying is a strong invitation to let go of all concepts, all accumulations of the mind, to let the knower dissolve, and only emptiness remains, where the truth can reveal itself. Disappearance is not suicide, it is awakening. Ramana is not encouraging you to give up your life or do anything extreme. He is not telling you to literally kill yourself. Instead, he asks a penetrating question. I am not asking you to sacrifice your life. I am simply asking, to whom does it belong? If you trace it back to its owner, you will not find anyone. And in that moment of profound understanding, when you realize that there is no real owner to this life, no belief is needed. There is only selfless knowing, a pure awareness, there is no one here. And no one, that is enough. It's not you who surrenders, it's the ego who collapses. One of the most subtle and profound misconceptions is the notion, I will learn to surrender. This seemingly modest statement is the ultimate trap, set by the ego itself. Why? Because the ego cannot learn to surrender. The ego can only disappear. That is the stark, uncompromising truth that Ramana Maharshi pointed out. For might of the surrendering me, just a subtle disguise. The ego is the ultimate disguiser. When it is exposed, it never gives up. It simply changes roles. Yesterday, it was the progressing me, always seeking growth, always wanting to be better. Tomorrow, it may be the enlightened me, complacent with spiritual achievements. Surrender is not letting go in the conventional sense, it's an internal collapse. We often confuse true surrender with the avoidance of responsibility or action. I refuse to take responsibility is not the same as surrender. I sit still and do nothing is not surrender. True surrender is not a conscious act, it is a complete collapse of the ego structure. This collapse does not happen because of boredom or disappointment with life. It happens when you see a naked and painful truth: the person who is trying to control everything never existed. It was an illusion built from thoughts, emotions, and memories. When the collapse happens, you are no longer the person living this life. When the ego collapses, you are no longer engaged in living consciously. Instead, you are living. Life flows through you, like a natural flow, without a steersman. There is no one in you to calculate gains and losses. There is no one in you to protect the ego from imaginary harm. There is no separate I. There is just pure life, flowing, breathing, existing, without a control center. It is the purest surrender, a total liberation. I control nothing. Nor do I try to stop controlling. Because there is no I. Ramana doesn't need you to fight the ego, he teaches you to look straight at it. Ramana Maharshi doesn't ask you to practice asceticism, strict abstinence, or self-destruction. He asks a simple, yet profoundly enlightening question. Who is the ego? Who is the one who controls this life? If you have the courage to follow the flow of thoughts, emotions, reactions, and trace it to its very roots, you will not find a person standing there. You will realize that the so-called I is just that. A familiar echo from the past. A series of mental reflexes repeated over and over again. A fragmented collection of memories, beliefs, and habits. There is no real person, no solid, permanent entity, standing there to control. And it is in this explosive moment of awareness, when you see the absence of that person, that so-called I collapses like an illusion, a dream that dissolves as you awaken. That is the greatest liberation, where you are no longer the one being controlled, but the absolute freedom. How to surrender? Not doing, but doing nothing. Many people have come to Ramana Maharshi with a common question, a nagging concern. Dear sir, I have diligently read the sutras, I have devoted myself to meditation, I have prayed devoutly. But why do I still not feel complete surrender? What more must I do? And his answer, as light as a breath, yet as strong as a thunderous awakening, was just 2 words. Do nothing. Surrender does not come from effort, but from the cessation of effort. We grow up in a world where the belief that to achieve something, you must act, you must make an effort is deeply ingrained in our subconscious. So when we hear the concept of surrender, the ego immediately springs into action, weaving elaborate plans. I will practice surrender. I will control less. I will try to trust God more. But all such attempts to surrender, no matter how noble they may seem, are still operations of the ego. A true surrender cannot be a product of the ego, because the only thing that prevents surrender is the existence of the ego. It is a vicious cycle that can only be broken by insight. Doing nothing, not passivity, but withdrawing from the role. The concept of doing nothing here does not mean giving up, not living, or ceasing all activities. It has a much deeper meaning. I stop playing the role of controller of this life. I stop demanding that circumstances bend to my will. I stop resisting reality as it is. Surrender is becoming transparent, a melting into the flow of life. When there is no more I to struggle with, no more I to yearn for, there is only pure life, flowing naturally. Ramana likens life to a train, and the burden on your shoulders. Ramana Maharshi used a simple yet poignant image to illustrate this. You are sitting on a train. The train is taking you. But you are still carrying a heavy backpack on your shoulders, because you think that if you put it down, you will lose control. The train will still take you to your destination, whether you let go of the backpack or not. So why not put down the burden, and rest in the bosom of God, right now, in this very moment? Letting go of the burden of control is letting go of the burden of ego. It is not about surrendering, it is about seeing the helplessness of the one who is trying. One of the most profound moments of transformation does not come when you succeed in surrendering, but when you see your complete helplessness. You realize that you cannot control everything. You cannot understand everything. You cannot hold on to anything forever. And when this realization explodes, instead of falling into despair, you melt into that which holds everything in the first place, the eternal ground of existence. No learning required. No practice required. Just being still and seeing this truth. Conclusion: surrender is not a loss, it is a return to that which has never left you. We have seen that God is not somewhere far away, but is the invisible ground where all thoughts arise and dissolve. We have realized that God cannot be found, because there is no real I who is searching. And when all the roles, all the ideas, all the attempts to control fall away, what remains is not emptiness, but radiant life, unowned, uncontrolled.